Hey, Bar Talk. We got Miss Jerry here with us today, and we're going to talk about just life on Alcatraz, growing up. This is the oldest sister of three that lived on the island, and we've heard from the last two. We saved the best for last. So, so how are you doing today, Miss Jerry?
Really well, really well.
That's good. That's good. That's good. So, we know that your family moved to the island in 1947. That would have made you about two, is what they say, what your sisters say. Um, when you were going, in your eyes, in your perspective, what do you think? What do you think the biggest rules were that you kids had to follow?
Well, there were rules for a lot of things about where you could go, where you were supposed to be, and when you were supposed to be there, and uh, what you. I mean, we had rules about like what we could play with, what we could throw away, what. I mean, like you couldn't throw away something that could be used as a weapon or something like that. So in those days, we didn't have a lot of plastic silverware, but even a plastic fork or something would not have been allowed because it could have been used in some way. So there were a lot of things to think about. It was full of rule. Um, the day was full of rules. You know, uh,
So, to the normal person that doesn't live on a notorious island for a prison, what what were some of the like most simplest rules that you knew that like what was the most simplest rule that you knew you could not break, and if you did, like it would be like the worst thing ever?
well, there were a whole lot of them, but the one I remember that would get in my way daily, kind of on a daily basis, is the telephone system on the island was prison oriented, and we couldn't just call to San Francisco. When we picked up the phone, it was being monitored by guards in the prison. It was for emergencies. So if you wanted to call a friend to say, let's meet out on the playground and play or something like that, you couldn't be on the phone but a very, very short period of time before a guard would interrupt you and tell you to get off the phone. That's that's the one that I was a little older than the girls when I left. I was around 13, 14, uh, and that's the time. I'm sorry. Uh,
No, you're good.
um, that's the time when the telephone was becoming important to a lot of people, especially me at that age. And so that was a rule that really, I mean, the kids now are on the telephone all the time. I couldn't be on it but 2 minutes before an adult would tell me to get off.
Yeah.
And I had to get off. I mean, there was no arguing with them or give me 5 more minutes or let me do that kind of thing. It was a rule that I would behave. On my first date on the island, I moved when I was 14, so I had dated a couple times before we moved. On my first date, the weather was so bad they stopped the boat. I was an afternoon date. I wasn't very old. They stopped the boat and I couldn't go over. So and there was no way to call. I mean, there was only one line to San Francisco, and there was no line to actually call and let somebody know you weren't coming. You know, you had to
Right.
wait for all that kind of thing. Okay.
um so your sisters have talked about the whistle system. since you grew up on the island and you were at such a young age, were listening out for the whistle just a thing that you guys learned to do, like
Right.
like a toddler learns how to walk? You guys learned to listen for the whistles. Is that would that be a true statement?
It's so true that I still set alarms for 10 minutes before I'm supposed to be ready.
So that's kind of been a foundation of you.
Right. It's just, some people learn you're supposed to be ready when you're ready, and I set an alarm. It's a whistle kind of, and it goes in the back of my head. Okay, you have 10 minutes. That means move
Yeah.
and be ready. Yeah.
So your sisters have kind of touched on it a little bit. Um, there was two boats that ran from Alcatraz to San Francisco, correct?
At any one time, there was one boat, but there were two boats available. The Warden Johnson was the normal boat, and the other boat, I can't. I may have messed that name up. Anyway, there was a second boat, the Warden McDowell, that
Yeah.
would back us up. Yeah.
Um, and how many kids would you say there would be about 60 kids ride the boat in the morning?
Yeah. Close to that on any given day.
Um, was there any mischief that you may have partaken in? Um, or were you kind of the good sister and didn't really get into a lot of trouble? Because your your younger sister Susan says that she was always in trouble.
True.
Um, uh, were you kind of the more mature one that kind of was like, hey, we shouldn't be doing that? Or did you have your times where you did kind of engage into the foolishness?
Well, I was the oldest sister, and like all older siblings, very often I was the one that was supposed to say, "Don't do that." Okay, and I but and I pretty much obeyed the rules. But we always there were always things kids get into, But generally, you could rely on me to be the one that would say, that's not the best idea or that's against the rules, that kind of thing. Yeah. Uh, but we
So you
were,
wouldn't be involved. You wouldn't be involved in the throwing of the mud balls as
oh,
your
yeah,
sister Susan would.
I was definitely involved in that. I was just going to say, most of the trouble ever got into on the island, especially, were group activities. And when everybody was throwing mud balls, yes, I threw along with everybody else. I was certainly wanted to be part of the group. And
And was
yeah,
and was
go.
your father working the dock at that time? Was that
No,
was that a time?
I don't think he was. But when we got off the boat, all of the fathers met us. Um, that wouldn't have been that night, but the next day after they had been called and we had been snitched on. Um, all of the fathers were down there um, because we were all involved. It was-
And so as your sisters also say, um, they say that when your mom would start work, started working, and you were old enough to kind of take care of maybe your sisters a little bit more. Uh, when she would be at work, would your dad be home before she would go off to work, and you guys would be there by yourselves, or or what would that kind of schedule look like?
Well, the guards were on kind of a rotating shift.
Hmm.
So I can't say that Dad was always there, but if he was available, he would be there. Also, it was a really small town where there was the impression that the bad people were locked up. Okay, um so you could go to somebody to get help right away. Um there wasn't I don't know, today with my grandchildren sometimes I feel like, well, um you know, it's hard to know who's safe. But there on that
Yeah.
island, the really bad people were locked up. And so if we were left alone for any length of time, which wasn't very long, okay, if we would come home like on the 3:30 boat, my mother would be home by 5 on the 5 o'clock boat.
Okay.
We were never left alone very long. And for the time that we were, there were other homes and other people that we could go to right away if Dad wasn't around. Um, it was a really close type of neighborhood. It was like your aunt lived next door or something. She didn't have to really be in the house. You just knew there were safe places to go.
Yeah. So would it be safe to say that your neighbors were just like family? Because I mean, you guys, or no, were your families not real close, or?
Well, I think that maybe for a lot of the people that lived on Alcatraz, our family was really close because we had a large group of cousins and aunts and uncles and my grandparents that lived in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area, and we would be there every free weekend for weeks at the summertime and everything. But a lot of the guards, being in the federal prison system, did not stay in one assignment for all that long. And so they maybe, would be moving around. So you just knew that even if you didn't know that person really well, they were safe just because they weren't locked up, which
Right.
is a false assumption. I know that now in my old age, but at that time you had that feeling that you could get help at any time.
Would
Some
it
of the families were very, very close, and
would it be safe to say? Would it be safe to say you almost maybe felt safer on the island than you did if you went over to San Francisco?
oh yeah, oh yeah. Always remember we had several rules in San Francisco going to and from school, and the one that I remember that would affect a kid was we couldn't go to public toilets. We needed to get down on the dock and go to the toilet that was available there. We weren't just to be running in there because there were bad people in the toilets. That's my childish remembrance of what I was told. That was a rule that we couldn't do.
Um, so you say you dated on the island. Did your sisters were too young to ever date
Yeah,
while they were on the
yeah.
island?
And the dates that I had were afternoon dates. Okay, where we went over and I got home before it was dark, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest problem with that kind of thing was scheduling. And generally, they were accompanied by some adult. I was 13, 14, so I wasn't really old, and it was the 50s. Um, One of the things that I remember uh, when we were going to move from Alcatraz,
Mm-hmm.
and we would have family discussions. I know my sisters may not have felt this way, but I had been there through most of my life and was just about ready to go into high school. And I would have liked to have stayed there and gone to high school with the kids I'd gone to grade school with. And so, what I remember about some conversations that we had about moving to Kansas was that the dating situation as teenagers, as girls got to be teenagers and were dating, would be so much less complicated. You know, the last boat going to Alcatraz was around midnight, and if you missed it, you couldn't go. And the kids I remember a little older than me would arrange to stay at a friend's house in San Francisco. But then there would be, that was one thing about it is that about Alcatraz and going to school was our parents weren't intimately connected to other parents in the school. Okay, yeah. They
Mm-hmm.
were on Alcatraz and they had that. So if you were staying in San Francisco, it might be with a family you didn't really know very well. Whereas when we were in Kansas, you knew the people that you were going to school. The parents all went to um, functions and that kind of thing. They kind of knew each other. So, yeah.
And as I understand it, you guys had birds living there on the island. Your father took care of birds,
My dad raised and breeded parakeets, and
parakeets.
yeah, and it was he was kind of in a joking way called the Birdman by people that knew that he was doing that. I know that one of the questions that the girls said you've asked him was what was our schedule when we were going to school. And the
Mm-hmm.
one thing I think I can add, I don't know whether they said about it and everything, but Dad raised those birds. And at one time, one of the mother birds that had hatched a nest was had turned a cannibal or something. Anyway, she wasn't treating her nestlings very well, and Dad brought a bird up that mother raised by feeding it with a dropper, and it was there as a really small bird, and it was kind of like our family pet. And what I remember about getting ready to school with that bird was that at a certain point of the day in the schedule, that bird would scream out and sound just like my mother, and it would scream, "Jerry, Susan, Joan, get in there and brush your teeth." And it was, it talked a whole lot more than a lot of parakeets because it had been raised right with us,
Right.
Yeah. His
No,
name
they
was
did.
Captain Jinx.
They didn't. They did not. They did not say that. And there was a riddle that went with that, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, he used to sing, "I'm Captain Jinx of the Horse Marines. I feed my horse on corns and beans, or on corn and beans." Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And who taught him that?
Mom taught him all of that. Yeah.
Um. So since you were a little bit older, uh, what was that conversation like when uh when your dad said, "Hey," or when you found out that you guys were moving to Leavenworth? What was did did your parents take your guys' invoice like input? Did they listen to your grievances? Or was it just kind of a, hey, you listen to us, we're the parents, you do as we say, and
It
we're
was
moving.
it was the 50s. I overheard some of the conversation, some of the, "Oh, these are the good things about moving and these are the bad things about moving." And since Dad worked for the federal government, that you didn't get it wasn't as easy to get a promotion in your
Hmm.
job unless you moved to different prisons and that kind of thing. That was part of it. I remember hearing Dad say that when they talked about it, he said he didn't mind going anywhere as long as it wasn't the Midwest. And we ended up at Leavenworth in Kansas. So there, but I remember these conversations. I remember the conversations about us kids, um, about dating and going to school and going to high school in San Francisco. The high school we had at that time had some big gangs going on and that kind of thing. And um, so for us kids, my mother and father thought that was better, I think. But kids think only about what's
From
right now,
and
what's going on.
since you're probably a little older, you probably would remember a little bit more. Was the move to Leavenworth? Because as you said, you didn't get promotions and whatnot. Was the move to Leavenworth in hopes that maybe he would come back? Because as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but and I believe you said earlier in our talk that that prison guards weren't there that long. They didn't stay very long. And would it be also safe to say that your family was probably an exception and probably one of the longer living families on the island?
That's really true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We were there longer than a lot of other families, for sure.
And
Uh,
when your father left the island, he was a lieutenant, right?
no, he was promoted to lieutenant when we moved in Leavenworth. When we moved, that was part of the move, was that promotion.
And then eh, and then how far did he get up into the prison rankings when he retired? Was he a
No, he
captain?
stayed. He stayed. He
Did he ever
stayed
reach
at
captain?
lieutenant. Yep,
No.
yep.
So you've been in Alcatraz for 14 years? About Is that about when you moved to Kansas?
Yeah, that
So
would be
you
about right.
moved to Kansas. You're probably close to going into high school. Uh, what were some of your first thoughts about reaching Kansas? Because as I understand it, you guys stayed in an apartment building, and then not very long after that, you guys moved on to the prison grounds on Leavenworth on the Missouri side. And how
I
was it
was,
from
yeah.
being locked away from all those prisoners to going to a prison, and you got prisoners just roaming around your front yard?
The the thing about, I think the last spanking I ever, this might tell you what you want to know. The last spanking that I ever got, and that wasn't a spanking, it was a tap on the butt type of thing, like don't do that. I had one of the things about going to Kansas is that the Kansas driving laws at that time for kids were very loose, and kids could start driving at 14. And Susan and I were driving at 14. I can't remember, John. But anyway, so I was, and the rules were you could drive to and from school and to and from work because Kansas was, very agriculture at that time, and the kids worked on the farms and that kind of thing. So they could get their license at 14 and help out at home. So, but for us, it was just going to school, and then Susan and Joan was, 3 years younger. I don't remember, but we all worked early so that we could drive. And I was driving at 14. So anyway, I had forgotten some books at home, and I ran home and ran in the house and grabbed my books and ran out and got in the car. And when I came back after school was over, Dad was really upset at me because in the moments that I'd run into the house to get my keys that I left there, or my books, I had left the keys in the ignition of my car. And I had a very honest conversation with my father about how it would have been my fault if an inmate had taken my car because I had left the keys in there. And there were inmates at that time doing yard work and housework around the homes and everything. So they were just out there as trustees. Not like, on Alcatraz, we never hardly saw or talked to an inmate. I
Right.
don't ever remember talking to an inmate. Anyway, but there they were quite present. And that was just part of my learning the difference between Alcatraz and Leavenworth, that, it might have felt to some people like more freedom, but it actually involved less written rules and more decision on what you were going to do and how it would affect everybody around you. Yeah.
How do you think your mom took moving from Alcatraz to Kansas? Because her family was, as I understand it, her family was all right there around the San Francisco area. Um, it had to have been hard for her to move away from her family, from being around her family for so long, and then moving so many miles away.
Right. And,
What and then also being around the prisoners. How did your mom take that?
she wasn't happy about it, but I remember my conversation with her in that when I didn't want to go because I was a teenager and I wanted to go to, I wanted to stay in the teenager life that I was developing there. I was dating, so I didn't want to leave boyfriends, that kind of thing. She told me that when you have a family, and the father, this was 50s and early 60s, so the man was the breadwinner, and your father has a job somewhere, that's where you go. And that was what I figured her basic attitude was, that if that's where the job is, that's where we go. But it was difficult for her in leaving her family. She had actually, her family had all traveled from Minnesota out to the Bay Area during the war. A lot of people moved there for work opportunities and everything. And they had left her in Minnesota going to nurses training. And she got so homesick, she moved out to California and didn't finish her nurses training. But so she didn't want to leave her family. And traveling was not as easy in those days as it is now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so she really didn't like it, but we had a lot of contact with her family, even though we weren't right there. But, yeah.
So you'll know about the picture that I'm talking about. It's a picture of you and Susan standing in front of a window with a bird, and I believe it's you that is petting it.
Yeah.
Uh, that picture has some significance for Susan. Does it have any significance for you? Like, does it bring back any certain memories or anything to you that comes about?
You can, from that picture, I think, see the prison because it's foreshortened. And so occasionally when I look at it, I remember that if the inmates were rioting or making a fuss, we could hear that, especially when we were in that apartment. And well, you just wondered what the hell was going on, what's going on. But in that apartment, it was really neat. We could, on one side of the apartment, see the prison. It wasn't really as close as it appears in that picture. And on the other side of that apartment, where we lived in 64 building and where our bedroom was, the window looked out over the bay and onto Berkeley and the eastern hills of the bay over there. So it was beautiful. There was an island. Can't remember the name of the island right now.
Angel
But yeah,
Island.
it was neat. Angel Island. Angel Island was between us and the shore.
And only the boys could go to Angel Island. That's what Susan says.
Well, she may be right.
Did you never want to go? Did you never want to go to Angel Island?
I never thought I could. It was okay. I mean, to me, it never entered my head. There were places on the island that the boys could go that the girls couldn't go, like. But we weren't really old enough to even be given that privilege. The boys could go fishing along the shoreline of the island, but we, as Jack Mitchell's daughters, and I never totally understood whether the rule was Jack Mitchell's or Alcatraz Island's rule. We could not go down there. There was an absolute rule that we couldn't go down there unaccompanied by an adult. But I think we're talking about boys that were older than we were, older teenage boys that might have gone fishing out on that on the shoreline somewhere else all the time,
With all the rules at Alcatraz, what looking back at it now, what do you think made it so much of a good place for your father to work? Because I mean, yeah, he must have liked it. He must have liked it okay enough to be there for 13 some years. Uh, what do you think it was his Marine training of being strict, or what do you think it is? Just in your perspective, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. Just looking back on it.
my father believed in rules. Okay, I agree with that. And he agreed, he thought that made life good, and the times when he didn't have rules were really hard times for him. He had run away from home when he was 14, 16 years old, and it was the middle of the Depression, and he ended up in Seattle, and there was no food, and it was horrible.
Hmm.
And that's when he joined the Marines, and the Marines fed him. And he said, but I can hear my dad saying, I'm not sure that he enjoyed being a guard that much. He just said that it was a job that needed to be done, and that he had the skills. He'd been trained with the skills to do it. And when Daddy came out of the Marine Corps, he was a sniper, and he had taught people to snipe, and he'd been in the war, and he didn't really have anything but war skills. And even though the economy in the United States was really good, they had all these young men who didn't have jobs. And Alcatraz had not had new guards trained. And normally the training programs for the guards were in one of the bigger prisons that would have situations there where the inmates weren't, major criminals with horrible, Alcatraz was the worst of the worst inmates. That was what it was supposed to be. And so they trained most of the guards in the bigger prisons with less security issues and that kind of thing. But after the war, they had um, this bunch of young men who needed jobs, and Alcatraz had not had new guards for a long time, and they put through a class of guards that were trained on Alcatraz. By the old guards. And the old guards that trained him were the ones that had gone through the riot of that had happened there before the war.
The Battle of Alcatraz.
Yes, that one. So those were the guards that actually trained my dad, who was trained in old school guarding, and black guards that had been put in positions of maybe losing their lives. So that was that. I don't believe, and if somebody could correct me, that there were any other guards except this one class that were actually trained on Alcatraz, because it wasn't the best training place. I mean, but they were, at that time, they were training right for Alcatraz.
Yeah, from the research that I have done, I have came across that same thing, that a lot of the guards were either handpicked by them wanting to move to another location, or either wanted to be in the San Francisco area,
Yeah,
or if they closed the prison down, they would move guards from that closed prison. I know they moved some guards from, I think it's Sandstone Prison, the
yeah,
Sandstone Federal
yeah,
Prison. They moved some guards from there. Um, but
yeah. And being a guard in a different prison was a different thing than being a guard in Alcatraz in those days. At Alcatraz, it's hard. Their inmates were all hardcore, and
yeah,
I think the one time that my dad ever talked to me about being a guard, I had read the book The Birdman of Alcatraz, in which there were guards that I knew named. Okay, so it was like you pick up a book and all of a sudden there, it'd be like you picked up a book about Billy the Kid, and all of a sudden they're naming your relatives and the people you love as the bad people, the outlaws,
hmm,
because uh, that's the way Stroud did it. And I was very upset because I had never considered that my father was my daddy.
right.
Okay. And although we got spanked occasionally and we had a lot of rules, he was a good man, and he did not torture you, or I mean, he was a good man. And he did the best he could. And if we were spanked, we were he didn't leave bruises or torture,
I,
beat you out.
I get where you're
Anyway,
going. I get where you're going with this. I recently listened to an interview that's on the internet, by a guard named Frank Haney. He's was the youngest guard to ever
yeah,
serve on the island,
yeah,
and um in a part of that interview, he says, none of the guards wanted to be there, but you had some guards that could handle a situation in a way that some guards just couldn't. And he made it seem like he made it seem like there was instances that because he was so young that he may have been scared of some of these prisoners at some time and maybe not know and freeze up and not know what to do. Um, back then and there, the 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 rights of prisoners and everything wasn't real a big thing. And would you say that it's safe to say that the the prison guards that were strict and that did control situations in a way that they needed to be controlled, whether it was a lightly of just holding somebody or whatever the case may be, whatever it is to control the situation, because like you said, these criminals were the worst of the worst. And
Right.
it was either stop them in what they were doing or be killed. And do you think that it's safe to say that people probably didn't understand that way of thinking as probably some of the
Right.
guards that were more controversial in that book?
I think that people forget that these guards that were my dad's age and who were trained by old school guards,
Yeah.
okay, had gone through war where they killed people and they did things for a reason, and it might not have been the soft way, the simpler and gentler way to do it, but it was the way that saved your life and got it over with and let you deal with the situation. Um, and uh, yeah, they had a different background, you know.
And I also
Dad, at one time when he was a China Marine and was over in China before the war, they had he had been arrested by the Chinese police and put in a prison, a bamboo cage prison, where they would beat him with bamboo sticks. Okay. And finally, the Marines figured out where he was and got him out of there. But he had a really, he had a really good sense. He had a line that I don't think people saw all the time, that he wouldn't go over. That he
mhm.
understood. I think, in my experience with that, he understood the difference between that kind of brutality that is really sick and the kind of action that takes care of the situation and allows it to calm down.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Um
his methods were really hard, but
and in an interview that I've heard that your father has done, um he states that he never was disciplined for anything that he may or may haven't done in the prison system. He had a pretty clean record as a prison guard. Um, from this same interview, it sounds like even though he might have been a little bit more of a controversial person, the inmates still respected him, and he could ask the inmates to do things that other people couldn't do, even such as a warden or associate warden.
right.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. My dad was old school, and he did it the old school way. He was, and the guards that came later than he were a little, and he stayed in Alcatraz, and a lot of the bureaucracy of the first part of his thing there, those guards were old school guards.
Mm-hmm.
And he did what he was told. He was a trained Marine who did what he was told to do. And he didn't step outside the lines. He did not get in trouble for brutality, for instance,
Right.
because people that were there in that situation saw where he was going. Okay, and yeah, he did not get in trouble. He never had a bad mark on his record, and um, uh, but as a lot of us have to do as we get older, he did have to learn when we went to Leavenworth a different kind of being a guard.
Hmm.
A different prison. It had to, we had trustees, we had that kind of thing. I know Dad um, stayed in contact with several inmates. Um, I think Joni tells the story about the one that he had for dinner.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he used to say to us, and I think this is maybe a secret of what I'm trying to say. He used to say to us, there are some of the smartest men in the world up there in that prison, but they didn't follow the rules and they had to face the consequences. And that you need to know that. And it was about following the rules. If there was a rule not to do something, he generally didn't allow you to skip that rule. As a matter of fact, um, I can remember him telling me that a rule is a rule and you obey it, but you sure as hell can work really hard to change it. You
Yeah.
can work all you want to change it, but during the time the rule exists, you obey it.
Yeah. Um, Looking back at it now, years and years later, what do you think your most fondest memory is, like that you can remember just like it was yesterday? Of a memory of on Alcatraz? If you have three or four, you can share those. If you just have one,
Okay.
that's fun.
Um, when we would play on the, we had what we call the big playground, which was just a mass of cement that used to be the military's marching grounds and that kind of
Hmm.
thing. And it was all generally very windy there. And we roller skated a lot. And you could be on your roller skates and open your coat up with your hands and hold it out and fly. It was like flying across. It was just, you just felt so free in that situation that was fun. We had marvelous parties. Marvelous parties. The guards would really go out of their way for the children to have parties there. Once a year, we would have watermelon feed where they would bring over on the water barge a whole mess of watermelons. Some of them went up. And in those days in San Francisco, a watermelon was not as easy to get as it is now. It was a treat, a major treat. Some of those watermelons went up to the inmates for their regular meals and things, but there would be a whole lot less, and they would set up these long tables, and we would cut watermelons, and you go down there and spit the seeds in the bay, throw the rinds in the bay, and be just drenched in watermelon juice. We just would be, and it was kind of a free for all type of thing that we would do about once a year. And then there were the Christmas parties um, that were major parties.
Is it true there's a rumor that your father was Santa Claus?
Yeah, well, Dad was very heavy and big. And they used to make him come down with and lead Santa Claus they would tell us, Santa Claus is coming, and then we'd all have to sing, Here Comes Santa Claus. And my dad would lead him out like onto the stage so that everybody, all the kids could see it wasn't my dad.
Who
He
came
would,
up with who came up with the rumor? Do you remember?
oh no, I think that was true. That was absolute. Oh, the kids all thought Dad, you get to be 9 or 10 and you want to tell people that Santa Claus isn't real. And, in my mind, I guess Bobby Hart, but yeah, that's just one of the kids that would be in that stage in my life where he would be wanting to tell you the truth about life. And, but yeah, I think everybody would say, "Oh, it's your dad is really Santa Claus," and then Santa Claus would come out, and it was really funny because Santa Claus every year was the same person. It was the same eyes, the same voice. The man knew you and knew about your family, could ask about your sister, could say, "Looks like you're going to have a new sister." I can remember Santa Claus asking me about your mom. And, that kind of thing. And then Santa Claus gave you, and which the guards got it for us, a big bag of treats, hard candies, oranges, apples, nuts, tangerines, all those kinds of things. So we all got one of those, and candy canes, and a big package from Santa Claus. And that he was really there. I really and truly did not believe in Santa Claus until we left Alcatraz. I thought that Santa Claus came on Christmas Eve, and that was the real Santa Claus. He came to our party and saw us, and then they kept us for a while playing games and dancing and fooling around. And when we went home, Santa Claus had been to our house, and so we would have our Santa Claus gifts. And I just thought that all the other Santa Clauses in the world were Santa Claus helpers, but that the real Santa Claus came to Alcatraz. And 14, even I knew I was being a little silly, but I still kind of believed it until I moved off that island. And the guy that did Santa Claus was the lighthouse keeper. And he saw all us kids every day, but he was not, he worked a different shift all the time. And he didn't have children, and we didn't see him very much, but he knew who we were. Yeah. It was really,
Did he live on the island?
yeah, he lived in the lighthouse. But that
Oh,
was behind the gate where most of our homes were.
so
And
they had the lighthouse keeper had a place to live in the lighthouse.
yeah,
Okay.
I think most lighthouses do.
Hmm. I just learned something.
Oh, wow.
Hey, I say you always got to learn at least one thing
At
every
least
day.
one thing a day, yes.
So,
One of the questions you asked has been, were you ever afraid of anything? And
oh yeah,
yeah, okay. And I did want to tell you that there were probably 2 times I was afraid on the island. Once I had stayed home from school sick and was in my bedroom in the last house we lived there was a cottage, and it was built right on the edge of a cliff. And I was laying there, Mom was working. I was fairly old.
was it in the
And I
middle?
went,
Which one was it? Which one was it? The one closest to 64 building, or was it in the middle? Or
no, we lived in the one closest to 64 building.
okay,
Okay. And I was in the bedroom that was hanging out over the cliff. Okay. And the bed kind of walked across the floor. Just the whole place was shaking, and it walked across the floor. And I got out of bed and looked out there, and I could see the dock and the line the yellow line that was painted there where the inmates would line up when we went to school for their counts and things. There was a yellow line they were
Mhm.
supposed to be saying. And the inmates were laying out on their backs with their hands behind their heads, taking sunbaths. And they were just absolutely not concerned at all. And I thought the house was going off the end of the into the bay, you know. And at that time, Dad called me. He was working at the prison, and he called me. He knew I was home. He said, "Get out of the house." And I said,
How
"I'll
did he?
just."
How did he call you if you didn't? If you only had one phone?
We only had one phone, but they would have considered that an emergency. Get your kid out of the
So
house
no, I'm saying, what did he call down or
from the
whatever?
prison. He
Yeah,
was in the prison
but
working.
the phone wouldn't be in your house, would it?
Yeah, we had one there.
Oh,
So
you had
they
a
could
phone.
call the guards, or the guards could call somebody from the house. And
Okay.
we could call other people on the island, but we weren't allowed to be on the phone very long. Anyway, he called me, he said, "Get out of the house." And I said, "Well, I'll go next door." And he said, "No, I don't want you in the cottages. Go to," and he didn't really want me in 64 building, which is also built right on the edge of a cliff. And I went across to B building and to family that we knew for me to stay there. And I was really scared. Mother was scared. Because she was in San Francisco in one of the really tall buildings that had, you know,
Was it an earthquake?
it was an earthquake. Yeah. Just,
Was it your first earthquake?
no, I'd felt earthquakes before, but this was one that was way over what I'd ever felt before.
Mm.
And the fact that it looked like I was the only one that had experienced anything with the inmates just laying there on the dock. There's movement there all the time, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so they did not feel this, what I thought was a major thing. And the other time I was scared was the night Mrs. Martin died. Mrs. Martin was our postmistress in the telephone, and her husband was a guard. And we had a little post office. I think Jones talked about that. Little post office. We get the mail. She worked fairly short shift, and the fog had come in on that day really thick. I don't believe we went to school. I think it's what we called a fog day, where the fog was so thick that the boat couldn't go out.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the kind of day where you could play hide and seek in the fog and just stand out there and nobody could see you. Really, really thick fog. Anyway, she went home and she never arrived home. And it got dark and the fog was bad. Um, her daughter Mary was in the same class as I was in, and so I knew who they were talking about when they said they couldn't find Mrs. Martin. And on Alcatraz, there was kind of a laid back behind your mind. If you couldn't find somebody, there were inmates around. You know, there were bad
Yeah.
people. So there was a lot of tension in that. And what I remember was it was they had gone onto her home was across the big playground. So she had to cross this big expanse where there was nothing. And people had been out hunting for her, but they could not find her. And so the guards lined up along the sidewalk on one side of the island. And they were just only as far from each other as they could see the other guard.
Mm-hmm.
And they swept across the playground calling out for her. And and as a little girl, and then they knew what was going on. They were looking for Mrs. Martin. And it was foggy and dark. It was one of the few times our fathers didn't have total control of what was going on at that moment. And foghorns blowing, and it had a real gothic feeling to the night and everything. And they got it, and I can remember hearing, "Here she is, here she is." And I can remember seeing the stretcher that they had put her on and them taking her off the playground. And they had found her, and she had had a stroke and had died, which is what I remember. And I was scared that night. Uh, those were really the
Would
only
you
other
would you
times.
say that was would you say that was scared? You were scared. You were truly scared, or could did you know what had happened? Did you know
No.
what the stretcher was for?
Oh, I knew she died at that moment. But that time when they were looking for her, now this is just totally me, I'm sure, and being raised with all these rules and control.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said before, it was one of the few times on Alcatraz where I didn't feel like the guards had control of what was going on. The bad people were locked in the prison, the good, it not only had a lot of rules, it was a very controlled situation. The whistle blew when you were supposed to get on the boat. You didn't go down there just because you felt like going down there, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that lack of control and the fact that it was somebody I knew that they couldn't find, I was scared. That was a scary moment for me. Uh,
So, just I'll try to wrap it up here soon. Uh, I want to end on a good note,
okay.
and um, would you say that would you have met your husband? Because you and your husband were together for how many years?
55.
55 years.
Yeah.
Wow, you just don't see that nowadays. I'm about halfway there. But
Yeah.
we're 22. Would you say that you would have met your husband if you guys never moved to Leavenworth? Did you meet your husband in Kansas?
No, no. I met my husband in California, but my husband's family was from the Midwest, and actually his family was very close to where the Mitchell family, my dad's family, lived. So in some ways, we might have. This is my thing. Both of our families, at one point in the history of the United States, in the 1600s, before the American Revolution came over, and both of our families came from France on the same boat. And their families moved across the United States within the history, fought the different wars and everything. The Mitchell family and my husband's family, the Maxey family, at really the same pace. And yet the families never intermarried or knew each other, even though their history was so very, very much alike. And I met Jerry here and in California. And he
How,
used to like to tell people, that when his grandfather met his grandmother, she was working as a laundress at a insane asylum, and he so and when his mother met his father, he was working in the Kansas City Zoo at the Kansas City Zoo. So Jerry would say, "Well, my grandfather got my grandmother from the insane asylum. My mother got my father from the zoo, so the only thing I could do in California was get my wife from Alcatraz." As if it was, yeah, yeah, that was his story.
so
Anyway,
how long did you stay in Kansas before you moved back to California?
I was the one girl that wanted to go back to California. The other two didn't really, Susan got married and Joan went to school there and everything. I stayed through high school and through nurses training, so that's about 7 years. And I went immediately back to California at that point. I met my husband 6 months later in California, and we were married 6 months after that. So, yeah.
And just so I can outline who your father was, will you tell me and America and everybody else in the world watching the story of him because he couldn't get a hold of you at nurses training?
Oh, yes, it's a good story. Um, eh, we had a tornado. I was going to nurses training in Topeka, Kansas. So that would have been 67, 66 or 67. I'm not sure. And Topeka, Kansas, was kind of protected by this little hill. So that the tornadoes, when they came from the normal place, it would pass right over the town. But the town had gotten really big. And this tornado came through and it really slashed right through the town. And then it went up the river to Leavenworth, and it went even north to St. Joe, where Susan was in nurses training in Missouri. It just went right up that border between Kansas and Missouri, I think. And she, anyway, I saw the tornado go through. It went right through the middle of the town, and I was on one side, and the hospital where I was training was on the other side of the path of the tornado. It took me about 8 hours. During the time that we were waiting for the tornado, I was at a church, and one of the ladies went into labor, so we had to get a ambulance to get her to the hospital because I was in training. I wasn't, I didn't want to deliver that baby by myself. Anyway, it took us about 8 hours to get there. And when I got there, I worked a little bit in the emergency room. I saw it was just crazy. And all the nurses had been working a lot of time there, especially the student nurses, because most of them had been right there in the hospital when it happened. And I remember scrubbing and assisting at a guy lost his leg that we did the removal in the emergency room because we didn't have room in the surgery to do it. Anyway, really tired, and they gave me some time off, and I went to the dorm to lay down for a nap. And all of a sudden, my father slams into the room, and he's dressed in his prison guard uniform. And he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm taking a nap before I go back on the floor." And he said, "But you're okay." And I said, "Yeah." And then he left. And the other guard, I can't remember his name right off, that had come with him, also in prison guard, said, "Your dad was really concerned. And as soon as he could leave the prison, he went in his uniform and he broke down, he went through all the stops and things. He would say, I'm federal." And he just drove through. He did that. And I said, "Okay, well, I'm assuming Mom and everybody's okay." And the other guard said yes. And then they left and went immediately up to see Susan in St. Joe. But he went to where he knew the damage had been worse. And then he
Right.
went up to see Susan.